Daniel Mercer had always believed that his life was something people envied because everything about it seemed perfectly aligned, as if fate itself had carefully arranged each piece to fall into place without resistance, and for years he carried that quiet pride inside him, not in an arrogant way but in a calm assurance that he had done things right, that he had chosen wisely, that he had built something meaningful from nothing, and at the center of it all was Clara, the woman he loved, the woman he trusted, the woman he thought understood him better than anyone else in the world. And when he thought about her, he never imagined doubt or betrayal, because in his mind she was not just his wife, she was his partner, his comfort, his reason to come home every night, even when the world outside felt cold and demanding and exhausting. And there were moments when he would sit alone in his office after a long day staring at the city lights and feel grateful, because no matter how difficult things became, he believed there was always someone waiting for him who genuinely cared, and that belief had carried him through years of struggle, through sleepless nights, through risks that could have destroyed everything he had worked for. And yet he never hesitated, because Clara had always been there, smiling, supporting, encouraging, and reminding him that he was not alone. And so on that particular evening, as Daniel prepared to attend the corporate gala hosted by his company, he felt nothing unusual, nothing out of place, nothing that hinted at the storm that was quietly forming beneath the surface of his life. He adjusted his suit carefully, making sure everything looked perfect, because appearances mattered in his world, and tonight was important, not just for business but for reputation, for connections, for opportunities that could define the future of his company. And Clara had told him earlier that she would meet him there because she wanted to make an entrance. She had laughed when she said it, her voice light and playful, and Daniel had smiled in return, because that was who she was, someone who loved attention, someone who carried elegance naturally, someone who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of it without even trying. And he admired that about her. He admired how effortlessly she seemed to belong in every space they entered together. And as he stepped out of his car, the cool evening air brushed against his face, bringing with it a sense of calm that he did not question, because everything felt normal, everything felt exactly as it always had. And the building ahead of him glowed with warm golden lights, reflecting wealth and success and ambition. And Daniel walked toward the entrance with steady steps, his mind already shifting into the professional focus he needed for the night. But just as he approached the doors, something unexpected happened, something small yet strangely unsettling, because an older security guard standing near the entrance looked at him with an expression that did not match the usual polite indifference Daniel was accustomed to receiving from staff at such events. And the man hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether he should speak at all, before finally asking in a careful voice that carried an unusual weight, "Sir, is that your wife?" And the question itself felt odd, because it came out of nowhere, without context, without reason. And Daniel paused, slightly confused, before replying with a polite smile that she was not there yet. And that was when the guard glanced around nervously, as if making sure no one was paying attention, before stepping closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that immediately changed the atmosphere around them. "You need to see this." And in that moment something shifted inside Daniel, not fully formed, not yet understood, but enough to make his chest tighten just slightly, as if his instincts were trying to warn him about something he could not yet see. And the guard reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone with hands that seemed just a little unsteady. And for a brief second Daniel considered walking away, dismissing the entire situation as unnecessary, as inappropriate even, but curiosity held him in place, and the guard turned the screen toward him, revealing an image that had been captured only moments earlier. And the world did not shatter instantly, it did not explode into chaos or noise or visible panic. Instead it slowed down, it narrowed into a single silent moment where everything else faded into the background, and all that remained was what he was seeing on that screen: Clara standing close to another man, her body angled toward him in a way that felt intimate, her hand resting lightly against his chest, her face lit with a kind of warmth that Daniel had not noticed in a long time. And the man beside her was not a stranger, not someone distant or insignificant, but Victor Hale, his business partner, his trusted ally, the man he had worked with for years, the man he had allowed into both his professional and personal life without hesitation. And for a few seconds Daniel simply stared, unable to process, unable to fully accept what his eyes were telling him, because the image felt unreal, as if it belonged to someone else, as if it had been fabricated or misunderstood. But deep down beneath the shock, beneath the disbelief, there was a quiet recognition that this was real, that this was happening, that something fundamental had just broken without warning. And the guard spoke again, softly, pointing toward the direction of the private lounge where the photograph had been taken. And Daniel lifted his gaze slowly from the screen, feeling the weight of that moment settle into his chest, not as a sharp pain, but as something heavier, something more suffocating, like a truth that refused to be ignored. And for a Brief instant anger flickered inside him, a natural reaction to betrayal, to humiliation, to the realization that everything he believed might have been built on a lie, but just as quickly as it appeared it faded, replaced by something colder, something more controlled, because Daniel was not a man who reacted impulsively, he was a man who observed, who calculated, who understood the importance of timing, and as he handed the phone back to the guard he nodded slightly, acknowledging what he had seen, without revealing the storm that was beginning to form beneath his calm exterior. And then he turned toward the entrance once more, his expression composed, his posture unchanged, as if nothing had happened at all, and as he stepped into the gala surrounded by laughter and music and the polished elegance of success, he carried that image with him, not as a memory but as a fracture that had quietly spread through everything he once trusted. And across the room he saw her, Clara, standing exactly as she had appeared in the photograph, radiant, confident, unaware, and when her eyes met his she smiled, the same smile that had once meant everything to him, the same smile that had reassured him through years of uncertainty, and she moved toward him with effortless grace, wrapping her arms around him as if nothing in the world had changed, as if the moment outside had never existed. And Daniel returned the gesture because he knew in that instant that the truth was no longer something he needed to search for. It was something he needed to understand and control, and as Victor approached them moments later, greeting him with the same familiarity, the same confidence, the same false loyalty, Daniel realized that whatever this was, whatever had been hidden from him for so long, it was deeper than a single moment. It was something planned, something sustained, something that had grown quietly behind his back while he believed in, something pure and genuine. And standing there surrounded by people who admired him, who respected him, who saw him as successful and composed, Daniel felt something inside him shift completely, not into rage, not into despair, but into clarity, because the illusion had been broken, and in its place stood the truth, raw, undeniable, and waiting to be faced. And though he did not show it, though his voice remained steady and his smile remained convincing, Daniel knew that nothing would ever be the same again, and that whatever came next would not be driven by emotion alone, but by something far more deliberate, something far more dangerous, because betrayal does not only destroy, it transforms. And in that moment Daniel Mercer began to change. Daniel walked through the gala with the kind of composed confidence that had always been his armor, masking the storm that raged silently beneath the surface of his carefully curated smile. And as he moved among the crowd he watched Clara laughing and mingling with other guests, her elegance effortless, her charm captivating, and yet every gesture, every movement she made that had once made his heart swell now felt like a knife twisting slowly in him, because he knew the truth behind the facade. He had seen the photograph, he had heard the whispered words that shattered his illusions, and now each laugh, each smile, each innocent touch she offered to others was a reminder of how deeply he had been betrayed. And though his chest ached and his mind raced with 1,000 conflicting emotions, he maintained his outward composure, offering polite nods and warm greetings while secretly cataloging every detail, noting every moment that could be used as evidence, noting every whisper, noting every glance, noting the way Victor lingered just a little too long, the way Clara's eyes sparkled when she thought no one was looking, the way their hands almost brushed against one another as if rehearsed yet natural. And Daniel realized with a sharp pang that this was more than a fleeting indiscretion, more than a careless mistake. This was a calculated dance, a performance crafted to deceive him, to lull him into a false sense of security while they plotted something far bigger than a stolen moment in a private room. And for a brief instant anger flared, threatening to break through his calm, but he quelled it deliberately, understanding that rash confrontation would accomplish nothing, that fury uncontained would play into their hands. And so he smiled and nodded as they approached him, offering the same warmth he had always shown, masking the knowledge that he now carried like a blade hidden beneath the folds of a suit. And when Clara stepped away to take a phone call, Daniel followed quietly, keeping just out of sight, letting the sound of her voice filter through his ears, letting the words reach him without interruption, because he knew he needed confirmation, he needed the evidence of her duplicity beyond a photograph, beyond suspicion. And as he listened, her voice floated on the air, soft and conspiratorial, and Daniel felt the final pieces of his world unraveling, because she spoke of things that belonged to him, of plans that involved his company, of futures that she believed she could manipulate for her own gain. And she spoke freely, unaware that he was hearing every word, unaware that the carefully constructed illusion of trust and love was now completely shattered. And the realization hit him that the life he had believed perfect was built on lies and deceit, that the woman he had loved and trusted above all else had been meticulously plotting against him. alongside the man he had considered his closest ally, the one he had shared both business secrets and personal confidences with, and as the conversation continued he pieced together the depth of their scheme, their plan to take what he had built, to rewrite ownership, to leave him with nothing while they walked away with everything. And yet even as the betrayal sank into him like cold lead, Daniel felt a strange calm begin to emerge, because he understood in that moment that he had the power to control the outcome, that though they had betrayed him he was not powerless, that he could play their game better than they ever imagined. And he began to formulate a plan in his mind, calculating each move, each counter, each deception required to turn their scheme against them, to protect what was rightfully his, and to ensure that the ones who had thought themselves clever and untouchable would discover too late that the puppet master was no longer the one they sought to manipulate. And with every detail he observed, every conversation he overheard, every gesture he recorded mentally, Daniel felt the heat of anger transform into something colder, sharper, more precise, a determination that burned quietly behind his calm exterior. And he realized that patience would be his greatest weapon, that silence would be his ally, that he would not confront them in the moment, but rather wait until the time was right, until every piece of evidence, every action he had meticulously gathered could be leveraged to devastating effect. And as the night wore on he continued to play the role expected of him, engaging with other guests, laughing when appropriate, shaking hands, offering congratulations, all while his mind orchestrated the dismantling of the very people who smiled at him and lied to him, all while he maintained the appearance of innocence that made them believe they had succeeded, completely unaware that the man they had underestimated was already several moves ahead, imagining the scene of their downfall, the way it would unfold, the shock and disbelief in their eyes when the truth was revealed. And though a part of him mourned the betrayal, the love, the years wasted, the memories tainted by deception, another part of him embraced the clarity that had come from it, the understanding that he could protect himself, that he could reclaim his life. And in that moment Daniel felt a strange kind of empowerment, a shift in perspective that made him aware that pain and betrayal could be catalysts for strength, that the heartbreak he endured could be transformed into a tool for precision and control. And as Clara returned to him, oblivious to the awareness he now carried, he greeted her with the same warmth he had always shown, offering reassurance that all was fine, that he was present and engaged, that he was still the husband she thought she had, underestimating the power of the silence between them, because that silence now contained a wealth of knowledge, a growing strategy, a carefully calculated plan of revenge. And with every step he took through the gala, every smile he forced, every interaction he orchestrated, Daniel felt the weight of the future settle into his hands, understanding that the night had changed everything, that nothing would ever be the same, that the trust he had once freely given had been irrevocably broken, and that from this fracture a new path was emerging, a path guided by intellect, by precision, by a deliberate resolve to reclaim everything that had been threatened. And so he continued through the night, moving among the crowd, navigating conversations, maintaining appearances, all while secretly plotting and observing and recording and calculating. And in those hours the quiet transformation within him solidified a resolve so absolute that no betrayal, no deceit, no duplicity could ever undermine it, because he had seen the truth, he had heard the conspiracies, he had witnessed the manipulation, and he had decided that he would not be the victim, he would be the architect of the reckoning, he would be the force that turned their own schemes against them. And by the time the gala drew to a close, Daniel had fully embraced the duality of his existence, the facade he wore for the world, the storm that raged silently within him, the knowledge that the game had changed, and that he would wait for the perfect moment to act, when all would be revealed, when the deception would crumble, when the betrayers would realize too late that the one they thought powerless was the one who held all the cards. And as he stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the glittering lights and the unaware crowd behind him, he felt a sense of clarity settling over him, a calm resolution, a dangerous quiet that promised inevitable consequences. And though his heart still ached, though the sting of betrayal still lingered, he smiled faintly to himself, because he understood fully now that the next chapter of his life would be written not by the lies of others, but by the deliberate choices he would make, guided by patient strategy and the certainty that betrayal could be avenged with precision. And Daniel Mercer knew that he would be the one to write the ending exactly as it should be. Daniel Mercer spent the following weeks moving through his life with the same calm exterior he had always worn, interacting with colleagues, clients, and friends in a way that suggested nothing had changed, while inside his mind a meticulous plan was forming and expanding with every passing hour. He observed Victor and Clara carefully, noting their habits, their conversations, the way they moved through the world, confident in their deception, unaware that the man they had sought to betray was already orchestrating their downfall. And Daniel began to implement subtle changes, small adjustments to finances, business operations, and legal structures that would seem routine to anyone else, but were in fact precise maneuvers designed to secure his assets and protect his company while leaving no trace of his strategy to alert those who plotted against him, and as he worked he carefully maintained his public persona, engaging in social events, hosting dinners, attending meetings, always smiling, laughing, and occasionally touching Clara's hand or offering Victor an approving nod, reinforcing their belief that all was normal, that he remained unsuspecting, and yet every smile was a calculated mask, every gesture a part of the larger design that was slowly unfolding. And in private, Daniel spent long hours reviewing documents, verifying accounts, and preparing contingencies for every possible scenario, imagining the moment when everything would converge, when every carefully laid piece of evidence and strategy would snap into place, and he could expose the betrayal in a way that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind of the truth. And he watched Clara as she moved through the house, arranging furniture, preparing dinners, and interacting with staff, noting the way she carried herself, the subtle hints of arrogance, the confidence in her actions, and he realized that she truly believed she had outsmarted him, that she had planned every step with precision, and yet she had failed to account for his patience, his intellect, his ability to observe and manipulate circumstances without revealing his intentions. And Victor too remained oblivious entirely, confident that the upcoming business deal would secure their fortunes and perhaps more importantly their sense of superiority, and Daniel allowed them to continue believing they were in control, because in doing so he ensured that when the moment arrived the impact would be devastating and undeniable. And as the day of the final contract signing approached, Daniel quietly reviewed every detail he had gathered, double-checking agreements, ownership structures, legal clauses, and any loopholes that could be leveraged against them, and he rehearsed in his mind the presentation, the reveal, the precise timing of each disclosure, the way the room would react, the shock and panic that would ripple through Clara and Victor as they realized, too late, that they had underestimated him. And on the morning of the signing he woke early, preparing himself mentally, physically, and emotionally for the confrontation that would finally bring his plan to fruition. He dressed carefully, selected his words and demeanor, knowing that confidence would be his greatest ally as he entered the boardroom filled with investors, executives, and staff. The energy of anticipation and expectation was palpable. Victor stood at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, his smile self-assured, while Clara sat beside him, poised, elegant, and composed, her eyes sparkling with the certainty of impending success. And Daniel stepped forward, greeting them with a calm cordiality that belied the storm of intent behind his gaze. The documents were distributed, pens clicked, signatures flowed, and for a moment the process appeared routine, mundane, exactly what Victor and Clara had expected. And then Daniel pressed a button on the remote in his hand, illuminating the large screen behind him. Instantly the room went silent. Photos appeared, images of Clara and Victor together, moments of intimacy that Daniel had captured patiently over weeks, images that told a story no one could deny, that revealed the depth of the betrayal. And gasps echoed through the boardroom. Clara's face drained of color, Victor's confident grin faltered, and Daniel spoke in a calm, measured voice, explaining that while they had plotted to take what belonged to him, he had already taken steps to secure his assets, to restructure ownership, and to ensure that neither of them would benefit from their deceit. And as he outlined the legal changes, the strategic maneuvers, and the evidence of their plotting, the magnitude of their failure became painfully clear to them, to the room, to everyone witnessing the reveal. And Victor attempted to interrupt, to argue, to protest, but Daniel's presence and control over the situation was absolute, his calm voice unwavering, his explanation clear, logical, and undeniable. And when security quietly escorted Clara and Victor from the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of awe, and Daniel watched them go, not with malice, not with glee, but with the quiet satisfaction that comes from executing a plan perfectly, from taking control of a situation that had once seemed hopeless. And as the boardroom emptied, Daniel took a moment to look around at the investors, the colleagues, the staff, and he felt a profound sense of relief mixed with triumph, because he had reclaimed what was rightfully his, exposed the truth, and done so without losing his composure, without allowing anger or emotion to dictate his actions. And as he stepped out of the office later into the cool evening air, he allowed himself a small private smile, acknowledging the weight of what had been accomplished, knowing that betrayal had been met with precision, patience, and intelligence. And though the wounds of deceit still lingered within him, they were tempered by the knowledge that justice had been served, that the manipulators had been outmaneuvered, and that he had emerged not only intact but stronger, wiser, more capable, and with the certainty that the future was entirely within his control. And as Daniel Mercer walked through the city streets under the glowing lights reflecting off the glass buildings, he felt a quiet peace settle over him, a peace earned through strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve, knowing fully that the sweetest revenge is not born from rashness or anger, but from careful planning, relentless observation, and the courage to act decisively when the moment is right, and in that moment he understood that he had not only reclaimed his company and his assets, he had reclaimed himself, his dignity, his power, and his ability to trust his own judgment once more, and the memory of betrayal became a catalyst for strength, a reminder of his resilience, and a testament to the intelligence and patience required to overcome deception. And Daniel knew that this was only the beginning, that life would continue to test him, but now he was prepared, armed with experience, clarity, and the knowledge that no one could ever again underestimate him or manipulate him without consequence. And so he walked on with quiet confidence, his mind already turning to the future, to new opportunities, to new challenges, secure in the understanding that the storm had passed and he had emerged victorious. Daniel Mercer's life had shifted into a strange quiet after the storm of betrayal had passed, a silence that was heavy not with emptiness but with the kind of calm that only comes when chaos has been mastered and the enemies that once threatened everything have been removed from the field. And as he moved through his home, now free of Clara's presence and Victor's schemes, he felt the weight of years of deceit lifting from his shoulders. The rooms that had once felt full of tension now seemed open and expansive, the air lighter, and each step he took resonated with a sense of control and clarity that he had not known for years. He reflected on the events that had unfolded, the careful planning, the patient observation, the meticulous strategy that had allowed him to expose the betrayal and reclaim his life. And though a part of him still ached for the love that had been lost for the years spent believing in someone who had never truly been faithful, another part of him felt liberated, as if the chains of misplaced trust had been broken and he could breathe fully for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He went about his days with a renewed sense of purpose, handling business with the precision and calm that had always defined him, but now without the shadow of treachery looming over every decision. He walked through the office greeted by colleagues, investors, and employees who admired his resilience and leadership. Unaware of the internal storm that had passed, he quietly acknowledged their respect and appreciation, while knowing the true victory lay in the personal reclamation of his dignity and peace. And as the weeks passed, Daniel found himself engaging with the world differently, not in fear or suspicion, but with a measured confidence that came from having seen the worst and survived. And he discovered small joys and simple things: a morning coffee in solitude, a walk along the city streets at dusk, the quiet moments that reminded him of the value of life untainted by manipulation. And one evening, as he left his office, a familiar figure caught his attention. The older security guard who had unknowingly revealed the first glimpse of betrayal months earlier stood at the entrance, and Daniel approached him with a calm smile and a sense of gratitude. He extended his hand and said, "Thank you for what you did that night." The guard chuckled softly, shrugging as if it had been nothing, just doing what felt right. And Daniel nodded, understanding fully that sometimes a small act of honesty can alter the course of an entire life. The guard's eyes met his with a knowing look, and Daniel felt the significance of that moment, reinforcing the realization that truth, even when painful, sets things right. And later that night, as he sat by the window looking out over the city lights, he reflected on how betrayal had changed him, not by breaking him, but by strengthening him. And though the memory of Clara and Victor lingered faintly like shadows at the edges of his mind, it no longer carried the power to disrupt his calm, his focus, or his sense of self. He understood that the pain he had endured had been transformed into wisdom and strategy, and that the freedom he now experienced was the most profound revenge of all. A revenge not born of anger or cruelty, but of patience, intelligence, and reclaiming his life fully. And as the days continued, Daniel allowed himself moments of reflection without regret, appreciating that the path to this peace had required endurance, observation, and decisive action. And he also began to look toward the future, considering new ventures, opportunities, and relationships, knowing that his past experience would guide him with clarity and caution. He became aware of the subtle strength that came from surviving deception and mastering the intricate interplay of human trust and betrayal. And he noticed the small details that once went unappreciated: the way the evening air carried scents of flowers from nearby parks, the subtle hum of traffic that gave the city life a rhythm of its own, the quiet conversations in cafes that reminded him of human connection. And in these moments, Daniel felt a profound sense of grounding that reinforced the idea that life continued in all its complexity and beauty, even after profound heartbreak and with every passing day. He embraced this understanding further, recognizing that the sweetest form of revenge is not to hurt but to thrive, not to dwell on those who failed us but to rise above their schemes and create a life rich with purpose and integrity. And he thought about the lessons learned, how patience, observation, and intelligence could outmatch deceit, and that sometimes the most powerful victories come quietly, unseen, until the moment of revelation. And he also realized that the people who once sought to manipulate him had underestimated the strength of character that comes from endurance and careful planning, that no matter how clever the deception, one cannot outmaneuver someone who has anticipated every move, and who has allowed anger to harden into focus, into calm resolve, into strategic brilliance. And Daniel smiled to himself, knowing fully that he had not only reclaimed what was his, but had also grown into someone stronger, wiser, more resilient, capable of facing the future without fear. And he took comfort in the knowledge that the peace he now felt was a reward of his own making, earned through courage, patience, and unwavering resolve. And as he looked out over the city skyline, the lights reflecting off the glass buildings reminded him that life goes on, that the world continues to turn, and that he had the power to shape his destiny, to protect what mattered to him, and to ensure that betrayal could never again control his life. And in that moment he felt a complete sense of freedom, a liberation of mind, heart, and soul, and he understood that he had become the master of his own fate, the architect of his life, and that no external force could undo the lessons he had learned or the strength he had cultivated. And finally, as night fell and the city quieted, Daniel sat in his home with the calm certainty that he had survived the storm, reclaimed his dignity, and discovered the most profound truth of all, that the sweetest revenge is living fully, peacefully, successfully, and with the knowledge that no betrayal can ever diminish the power of a life well claimed, a life guided by integrity and intelligence. And in this silence he found not only peace, but the promise of a future entirely his own, a future shaped by wisdom, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of having emerged victorious from the darkest of betrayals. And Daniel Mercer smiled, knowing that at last he was free.